What is going on, everybody? This is the Clap Your Hands podcast, playoff edition, blowout game one edition, Sunday morning edition. We got early morning Kyle in the house, but honestly, Kyle, I wouldn't blame you if you're tired because yesterday for you was just a masterclass in basketball knowledge. Like game one played out. It just played out exactly how Kyle Neubeck said it would. I mean, really from start to finish. And then even as we were joking before the pod, your boy Derek White killed it yesterday too. So
Hey.
a good day for Kyle, a good day for the Sixers. Really just everything you could have hoped for all around in game one.
Listen, I feel for 9:45 on a Sunday, I feel pretty energetic, honestly,
Yeah.
because that 1 p.m. game, oh my God, what a
Beautiful.
delight that is. We're in the locker room at like 3:45. I mean, come on, you can't beat that. That's just
Well, dude,
I
me
don't
and
think
my
people understand, like on the from the fan base. It's like I get why people don't like the afternoon games. They have other stuff going on. Got to hit Home Depot for your home improvement stuff, whatever. But like for me to be essentially out of the arena by 6 p.m. is just so beautiful.
Well, so last night, it was supposed to rain and ended up not. So me and Kristen went out to get something to eat on Passyunk, and it was crazy. Like we're sitting there eating dinner. It's probably, I don't know, 7:30 or so. And it felt like the Sixers game was 3 days ago at that point. And I think partially not only because it was the 1 o'clock start, but let's be real, like they dominated that game. There was really no intrigue or drama to come from that game. We'll get into the James Harden thing a little bit. That seems, maybe the only kind of things where people are torn on. But big picture, quick, I'll just kind of kick it off. Like I thought throughout the game, and by the way, they put me up in the JV press box. I had to look down at you in the big boy basketball press box the whole time.
What a shame! What a shame!
I will say it's a better view up there for what it's worth. Like I can see the court better, but that's just me emotionally rationalizing to myself. But so anyway, I thought that although the game, it felt like it was 7 or 8 points, sometimes it would get to 10, it would get like the whole time it felt relatively close until the end. I didn't think there was a single minute or even second of that basketball game where I thought to myself, oh man, the Nets might win this. Like it was close for a stretch. But, I saw like people on Nets Twitter tweeting, this is a game. They have a chance. No, the Sixers had complete control of that game the entire time. And then they pulled away in the fourth. So I thought in terms of just big picture, what you wanted to see from game one, you talked about it, how game one's at 1 o'clock could be dangerous. I thought it was like a professional win by the Sixers.
Well, I think that to me is the most important takeaway yesterday. Like, I'm assuming at one point in this series, it's the reason I didn't pick a sweep is that I think there'll probably be a game they let their guard down a little bit and Brooklyn will do enough to probably steal a win from these guys. But I think it was really important that this team took the week off. They got healthy. They came into this game that's a little bit of a trap game, 1 p.m. to open the playoffs. And they just blew their doors off. Like Brooklyn had an amazing shot making game. It's actually the single best, so it's the single best shooting performance a team has ever had in a loss in the playoffs. And if you look down the list of like a lot of the biggest or the best shooting performances and losses, most of them are like, 6-point loss or 8-point loss or whatever it is. They're like fairly close games. This game was not even close. And so I think for Brooklyn to execute a good game plan against Joel Embiid, to have an incredible shot-making game, and ultimately lose that game by 20 points, and Jaden Springer and the bench guys are in at the end of the game, that's got to be so demoralizing for those guys. And you already have, look, I know this is part of the gamesmanship in the playoffs, but for Jacques Vaughn to already be at the press conference at the podium crying about how it's being officiated, that is like, you already lost the series, man. You turn to that in like game 3 or game, like when things are really going off the rails. Joel, how he was officiated yesterday had absolutely zero impact on that game. So to be grasping at straws like that, it's just like, man, these guys had one of their best shots they can offer, and they just got absolutely blitzed.
Well, to your point, it had to be demoralizing because the first half, Mikal Bridges comes out and is playing well. Another thing you predicted, which I think is absolutely true and played out. The Sixers, like Mikal Bridges to me, watching him, is a player where you just let him cook and he'll average 27 points next year, and they'll be playing in the play-in tournament unless they make some type of significant change to their roster. You saw in the first half, Mikal Bridges was playing well. People on Twitter were reacting like, oh, he's going to keep him in this, blah, blah. And then the Sixers just decided in the second half, all right, Mikal, you're not scoring anymore. And that was that. Like, I think I read in your piece today, maybe he got 2 shots up in the second half and only scored, 5 or 6 points or something like that. But I thought the other big picture takeaway from me from that game was not just a discrepancy in talent, because let's be real, this team is way better than the Nets. But I thought 2 things really stood out. And it's one game, not to go huge big picture here, but this team is such a better shooting team than it was in past seasons. They set the, I believe, franchise record for 3-pointers made in a game with 21, if I'm not mistaken.
And they got, I think, like 48 up. Like that to me is almost as important. One of the big problems for this team, like in the Warriors game, we talked about it a lot. The Warriors got up a ton of threes. They want to say they got up like 50 threes against the Sixers. And that was the difference when Joel scores 46, but it doesn't matter because the 3-point margins were what they were. So for the Sixers to open the playoffs and say, we're comfortable shooting 48 threes in a game, like that to me is a big deal just on its own.
I agree, especially when you think about who the team's perimeter players have been in past playoff series. And look, we've talked about it a lot, but I think after this game, it's especially important to bring back up. They used to have a point guard in Ben Simmons that literally wouldn't shoot any threes. Yesterday, James Harden took 13 3-pointers, right? And then you just go down the list. Like Tyrese Maxey's a better player now than he was certainly 2 years ago against the Hawks, and a better player than he was against the Heat. He's 3 for 5 from 3. Tobias Harris, 3 for 3. PJ Tucker, 2 for 5. Like Niang comes in, 2 for 4. They just have so many people on the roster that they can count on to not only be willing to take a 3, which is a big leap coming from like a Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz era of basketball, but to make them. Like they are a great 3-point shooting team. And it's especially important when teams play Joel like they did yesterday. So the 3-point one to me, but also, and this is kind of piggybacking off the 3-pointer, they're just so much deeper than they were in past years. And it's one game, it's against the Nets. Who knows against Boston how these bench guys will play. But they just have so many more people they can go to where the game is not cratering when their starters aren't in. And really, Paul Reed, certainly, the Paul Reed game took place. But yeah, I just thought the 3-point shooting and the bench from a full team perspective were my biggest takeaways from the performance.
Well, to piggyback off of that, I just think the thing that you're most encouraged by if you're the Sixers is that they have this good offensive performance and nobody had to step outside of their role, right?
Yeah.
Like all these guys just sort of, we're in our spots. We're going to space the floor. Joel gets doubled. He swings the ball around the perimeter. James was taking catch and shoot jumpers when they came to him. Like that to me is as big a deal as him hitting a bunch of pull-up shots. Like the fact that he was willing to just, I have an open catch and shoot jumper. If teams are going to double Joel, I got to take it or I got to make the right decision.
He's been pretty good at that this year. He seems very willing to do that this year. Yeah.
Yeah. But so the point being, like all of these guys simply just played their roles. Like they understood what they needed to do in this game. And they understand that, look, if the Nets are just going to sell out against Joel, I don't need to do anything crazy. We don't have to go off script. We've planned for this. I know where I need to be and what I need to do when I get there. And so they just look like they were prepared for all of this, which one reflects well on the coaching staff and the scouting they did coming into this series, the prep work they were doing, and certainly reflects well on the players. And then on top of that, I just think they played harder than Brooklyn. Like, I know people were worried about, they're the younger, more athletic team and all this stuff. But I gave the rundown several times in written and podcast form. They were not a good offensive rebounding team. They are not an up-tempo team. So the ways they were going to hurt the Sixers, or that the Sixers have been hurt historically, were not really going to show up. And not only that, the Sixers killed them on the offensive glass. They were great in transition, just ran them to death whenever they got stops. And they look, that was a comprehensive performance from the Sixers. And there were moments in that game where they didn't shoot well early and they still were out in front in the lead, maybe because they just had more talent than Brooklyn. But yeah, I mean, there's so much you can say about this that's to the positive. And I think this is a game like this is why, not to get too carried away, that I just feel better about this team this year. Like they're just a better, more complete team that has more ways to beat you.
Well, you've been saying this all year, and I think like Harden gets the headlines because of the game he had, but also because of the debate around him. The 3-point shooting gets the headline. To me, it's Joel Embiid as to why they were able to dominate that game. And here's why I think that. Because I think if like 3 years ago, a team plays Joel like this, where they're constantly blitzing him with the doubles and they're constantly making him get the ball out quick, I think you see him get frustrated a lot sooner. I did think in the second half, there was maybe a 5 to
Yeah.
6 minute stretch where he looked a little frustrated. But outside of that, early on, he seemed ready, to your point about the coaching staff, like he knew to expect it and he handled it perfectly. So I think in some ways it's a game where, like why quarterback win-loss record to me is an important stat, because sometimes you look at a quarterback stats and it's like, well, he didn't really do that much, but he controls the entire game. I thought Joel controlled that entire game from the jump. Like his willingness to pass early, I thought set up the shooting. His just maturity about it set it up. Still finishes with 26 points. It's not like, he had 12 points or whatever. But I just think when you talk about why this team is different and why Joel is different, I thought yesterday was such a perfect example of it, because they don't win, or maybe they win it, but they don't dominate it the way they did yesterday if they played this game a few years ago, in my opinion.
No, like I 100% agree, because the terms of that game were set by simply having him on the floor.
Mhm.
Brooklyn, very clearly, their goal coming into the game and into the series is we're not going to let Joel Embiid beat us. Well, okay, you're going to give up 45 open threes if
Yeah.
that's the case. And look, I said before, in game 4 against Atlanta, it was a great example a couple years ago of the difference between Joel now and Joel then. That game, Joel shoots 0 of 12 in the second half against Atlanta. They lose that game on the road, was ended up being a pretty pivotal loss in that series. And the worst problem was not that he went 0 for 12. It's that he got tunnel vision and that he was like, I want to go against doubles and I want to play through traffic and dribble at these guys. And yes, he had a couple of those moments, but by and large, he felt and knew those doubles were coming and said, that ball's getting out of here. And I do think if Brooklyn looks at the tape, they might see, look, you might have to time the doubles differently. You let Joel get set a little bit. Maybe you let him dribble and then you pinch on him, versus like they're trying to double him on the catch. He's just seen that too often
Yeah.
now. Like he is far enough into his career. If you double him on the catch, he now is not just immediately putting the ball on the floor and leaving himself susceptible to turnover. So I do think the Nets will probably be smarter and a little more well-timed with how they double him moving forward. But even still, like then if you give him a gap, if he attacks quickly, then he's getting to the rim, then he's getting fouled, then he's scoring, 35, 40 points. So there are not a lot of good options against him. And I think it's a great example of how MVP does not always mean you're filling up the box score or you're
Right.
scoring 50 points. Sometimes it means the other team's attention is so focused on you that everybody else is able to have a good game. Like, how many assists did he end up with
It didn't
yesterday?
even end up with that many, I don't
Like
think.
3 or 4 probably.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
3
felt like all
assists.
game, though, he was picking them apart.
Right. I think if you went and looked for like hockey assists in that game,
Agreed.
he
Yeah.
probably has double digits there. And I think just the offensive process that they had was really good for most of that game. And that to me is more important than, if Joel had 8 assists, it's not that like the game he played would have been any better.
Well, and the good thing for the Sixers is now the only adjustment the Nets can really make, and look, they could just stick with it, and if they do, I think Embiid will keep playing it the same way. But if they do adjust, then you really just mean the ball is in Embiid's hands more, because either the double is coming a little later, or they're gonna frankly maybe not double at all, in which case Joel is just gonna absolutely cook. So I thought it was, from that perspective, a great game one from Joel, and I think he deserves more attention than he's probably getting for that performance. But the person who is getting a lot of the attention, James Harden. So I don't know. Do you want to go first on Harden? I have my opinion of his play, but what do you think from Harden?
No, I think he was really good. I won't go as far as a lot of people did yesterday just because the finishing inside the arc was so bad. I think there were some plays that Brooklyn just made good defensive plays. Like Day'Ron
Mhm.
Sharp had a really good chase down block on him in the half court. That's when you just tip your cap to the defender and say that's a great play. Otherwise the finishing was bad, and he acknowledged that after the game. But look, I think you also see some of the ramifications of doubling Embiid in Harden's game yesterday, right? Like he's a guy that against a set, like just everybody plays their man-to-man defense he'll pick you apart as a passer. If you're going to double Joel and use Harden's guy to double him pretty often, giving James the space to operate as both a shooter and a playmaker is really, really dangerous. And, Doc referred to him as like a catcher in baseball on
Yep.
Saturday, said he essentially called a perfect game. And so I do think the decision making was awesome. Like, I don't care as much about the pull up shooting. Like, that's going to come and go. Those are difficult shots. But to see him at least confident in himself and his body, he obviously is feeling good. That was really important. And the number one thing to me, people get wrapped up in who the backup center is during these minutes and what the plus minus is for them. But James and that second unit being able to succeed and outright win minutes, that's at least a top 3 to 5 story for the team in the playoffs. Because we've seen, like, even when Joel has been poor on offense, they've won his minutes in the playoffs and they almost always lose because the second he hits the bench, it's a total disaster. And I think the biggest difference between early in the year bench minutes and late in the year bench minutes is not that Paul Reed is playing. It's that James Harden is the guy leading that group. And he said yesterday after the game, I asked him about this, like what the difference is. He's had input on like who's going to be on the floor, who's around him, what they need in order to succeed in those minutes. And so I think Doc has sort of made him a partner in setting up that group.
Yep.
And clearly you can see that he's comfortable within that group now. Like, they all have their roles. They have enough shooting between, Melton, McDaniels, and Niang. They have enough defense between Reed, McDaniels, and Melton. Like, they kind of play off each other in nice ways. Now, Niang, I think, is going to be a sore spot moving forward. But if Harden can be that guy and lead them in successful minutes without Joel on the floor, I think we'd both agree, like, Joel and James together, they're winning those minutes. Like, they've won those minutes from the moment they made that trade, even when these guys had, no chemistry or no immediate chemistry to speak of. So if they can at least draw even in those minutes, like, that makes this team a potential title team, period.
So I thought what happened with Harden yesterday is something you see like in a lot of sports media. And I'll use myself as an example. Like, let's say going into an Eagles game or whatever, like all week I've thought, man, they're like Hurts is going to struggle to pass the ball against this defense. And because I think that going into the game, the bar for me to like accept that he's looking good is higher, right? So I think with Harden, people went into this game yesterday saying, how's his athleticism going to be? What's he going to look like? And because of that, he had to be like almost extremely explosive the entire game for people to sit back and go, oh, well, actually, he did look good. So to your point, I think when I watched him yesterday, again, from my 800-foot view in the press box, I thought he looked great physically. Like, I thought he got to the basket pretty easily. There were a few times Mikal Bridges had him. You would think Mikal would be the exact person that he would struggle against if he was limited physically. Mikal, by the way, in person, Mikal Bridges, very long arms. Like, he is you can see why.
It's like Inspector Gadget.
Dude, it's insane. It literally reminds me of Durant, just in terms, I mean, he's not as big, but just in terms of seeing someone and being like, holy shit, that person has long arms. But so anyway, Harden, when he has Harden on the perimeter, you would think that's something he would struggle with. I thought there were a few times Harden got right by him. And so, yes, he needs to finish better around the rim for sure. But I would have been more concerned if the shots he were getting at the rim were like, like floaters because he couldn't get all the way up or stuff like that. He got to the rim. He just missed. To your point, there were a few plays I thought that they were just great defensive plays by the Nets. Now, maybe you could say if Harden's able to get up a little higher, they're not able to make those plays. I think that's maybe a fair question. But in terms of the 3-pointers too, no, he's not going to make 7 every game. He's not going to shoot 7 for 13 or whatever it was. But let's not act like he didn't shoot a really high percentage all year. He shot like basically 40% on almost
his best shooting season basically ever.
Yeah. Exactly right. So he's not going to make 7 a game. But if the Nets plan, or if we're going to look forward, to Boston or whatever, if the plan is like count on James to make a bunch of threes, it's tough for any player to do, but ultimately James has shown this year he's a great 3-point shooter. So I leave that game feeling awesome about James, and I don't really get any of the hesitation in some ways from people of saying like, man, he didn't look that great. I thought this was almost the best you could have asked for from him.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's ultimately kind of nitpicking saying, "Oh, he didn't finish well at the rim." Getting there and being able to beat their length at the
Exactly.
point of
Yeah.
attack is very important. Not that I think Dinwiddie is included in their length or their good defenders
No,
department,
no.
but sending him to the shadow realm with that one crossover was awesome. And I
Yes.
feel like he's missed a ton of those shots after crossing guys over this year. So it
I think those
was
are
nice to see him
deceivingly
hit
hard
one.
shots to make. Like, like you've dropped the guy, everyone's waiting. I feel like those are deceivingly tougher shots.
Yeah, so it's nice to see him get one of those. He also, I want to say, he drew two different charges yesterday. So
Mhm.
defensive stopper James Harden in the
Yeah, he
building.
had a good possession against Mikal at the end of maybe the first half or something like
Now,
that.
look, he also got killed by Mikal for most of that end of the first
That was the
half
plan.
period.
That was the
So,
plan. Just let him cook
but
James.
yeah, like, look, I think that should give you some optimism regarding James. I think he was really good.
Mhm.
Whether he's going to be able to score 30 in a game where they really need him to, still kind of up for debate because again, you do have to score inside the arc in order to beat the best defenses. Like they will sell out on you as a shooter, and not
Mhm.
every team is going to be hard selling out on Joel at the elbows and playing like auto doubling him every time. Like I even Brooklyn, I don't think that's going to be the plan for the entire series because I think they'll look at the tape of game one and say, we gave up like 45 open threes and
Right.
we can't really afford to do that again. So they will need James to be a more dangerous downhill isolation type guy. But I think some of it is you trust the process over the results here. Like I think he showed more than enough to say, okay, he's feeling pretty healthy coming into the playoffs. And like that was to me the only real concern coming in was if James isn't right, then they don't really have a chance to win. Him looking good enough physically, even if the finishing was not perfect, I think
Mhm.
that's more than enough to say, all right, they're on the right track and he's on the right track.
And I like you dropping a nice little trust the process in there. It
Got
never
to,
goes
man.
away. So I have three guys that I want to talk about, and we'll kind of get through them quickly to wrap this up. So one for me, I mean, you can just start and take your PJ Tucker victory lap. Like yesterday was exactly why you give him
I
the 10
wouldn't
minute.
say I need to take a victory lap because I've been skeptical of him
That's
recently as
fair.
well.
That's
I would
fair.
say
That's
that.
fair. But I feel like you kept pointing out, and I think it's true. Oh, well, actually, we'll take the victory lap together. It'll be a clap your hands victory lap of just saying the playoffs were where where it was gonna matter. Like that's where you're gonna find out he's cooked or not. I think you tweeted this yesterday. Like he came out of that game looking like he was shot out of a cannon, like
Oh, it's crazy.
as if he would just as if all year he's just been saying, all right, I'll just kind of coast and not blaming him or ripping him and saying like come playoff time, I'll be ready to go. He comes out, he gets a offensive rebound, I think on the first or second possession. He gets two or three in the first half. He makes his first 3-pointer. Like he was everything you wanted from just the glue guy that's going to do all the little things. I think it's a perfect example of the stat sheet not showing the impact a player had on the game, much like Joel's
Thank you to
assist.
producer James for putting PJ Tucker victory lap
Dude,
in
he's
big
killing it
letters at the
today.
bottom, by the way.
Yeah. This is why you have to watch on YouTube. You got to see the updated titles throughout the game, throughout the pod by James. But no, I thought PJ Tucker was I mean, like if they get this PJ all playoffs, yeah, they're going to be a really really hard team to beat.
Yeah, look, that was that was like $1 million of the $10 million they paid him in that
Right
game
there,
yesterday.
exactly.
I just think I've been skeptical recently that he's going to be able to stay on the floor against good teams. I still don't know if I'd call Brooklyn a good team.
No,
So
they're like a
maybe
player.
the jury's out on that one. But I think a lot of the things you'd say about the gap in competitiveness and effort and rebounding, a lot of that comes down to PJ setting the tone, right? And one
Mm,
of the other things, and he said this in the locker room on Saturday, one of the consequences of double teaming and doing things like that to stop one guy, offensive rebounds are going to be there. There are going to be opportunities to slip between the cracks as guys are scrambling trying to find their man after double teaming somebody. Open shots are going to be there. He only made a
yeah,
couple yesterday, but a couple of made threes for PJ is great. And I think the more important thing, I keep harping on volume for these guys, but PJ taking tightly contested threes, including the first one he made, it's like hand in his face. I think that
yeah,
was the tightest contest he shot against this year. That to me is a great sign. That's somebody who's confident, who's saying, I don't give a shit if I've had ups and downs during the season. I'm going to let it fly. This is my job. Joel's getting doubled. Like that plays into the point I was making about these guys understanding their roles and embracing those. And I just look, we also heard that PJ was cursing out Paul Reed at halftime saying, we need more from you. You got to do this. You got to do that. And Paul Reed comes out in the second half and he's putting on N1 mixtape moves after offensive
Unbelievable.
rebounds. And so, I don't want to give PJ Tucker all the credit for that, but this is who they brought him here to be,
Yeah,
right?
it's what they need from him.
The guy who's mixing it up, the guy who's hitting people hard on the boards, who's, just making those back-breaking, soul-crushing plays that the Sixers felt firsthand. Like, look, we can argue about the talent between the two teams last year and Joel being hurt and this and that, but Joel said it after the series. Like, we don't have guys like PJ Tucker who make these plays that not only are they impactful and that they give you an extra possession, it's also just like, man, this fucking guy again, like he really did that to us. He really snuck his way past a bigger, younger, more athletic player. Like, what is going on here? And I think you just see how this guy in his late 30s was able to command $10+ million a year because he just shows up when it matters. And by the end of that game, Brooklyn wanted nothing to do with him. Like they flat out gave up late in that game, including the guys who were brought in, the reserves who had something to play for. Like, yeah, put me in the rotation, coach. Fucking PJ's out playing those guys too. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, he was, to your point about earning $1 million of the 10 million. If he can be the reason they get to the finals or even the conference finals, you could argue he'll earn almost the full value of the contract, like just in terms of the 30 million. So he'll be an important player. All right. So Paul Reed, tell me why Paul Reed isn't just Nick Claxton with less minutes, or Nick Claxton isn't just Paul Reed that gets to start. Like when I watched them yesterday, Nick Claxton was nowhere to be seen. He seemed completely invisible. Paul Reed, I actually thought made an impact on the game. Like I was extremely impressed. You touched on it a little bit, but what they got from Paul Reed yesterday was everything that Sixers fans have been waiting for from the backup center spot.
Well, so Nick Claxton suffered because Spencer Dinwiddie might be the worst lob thrower in the history of basketball.
Besides Tobias.
He threw 4 lobs yesterday. I think they were all 4 of his turnovers, maybe all 4 of his turnovers. I have to double check. Were on lob passes that I don't think the tallest person in the history of mankind would have gotten to. So I think Nick Claxton was hurt by that. Like he got into some good spots and then Dinwiddie just missed them.
Yeah.
Look, Paul Reed is not at that level as a consistent switch defender. Claxton has been a really, really, really good defender. Not just this year, but last year he was coming on. And I think with a better team around him, he ends up looking better. I think at times yesterday, he slowed Harden down early in that game. Like he's part of the reason that Harden was struggling to finish inside the arc. But here's what I will say. I think Paul has certainly improved down the stretch and in very meaningful ways too, right? Like he didn't hold up great on switches yesterday, but he has been very good as a switch defender down the stretch, has been more disciplined. There's less stupid fouling. There's just less nonsense from him. And on offense, I think he's been a revelation over the last couple of months. I think part of that you credit to Harden, who's finding him in these spots at the dunker spot, on the roll, around the basket, and he's hitting them. So all Paul has to do is go up, dunk, layup, whatever it is. But Paul helps himself too, right? Like crashes the offensive glass and has the blessing of the coaching staff to do so. That's a very important thing. Like some teams, they just tell you to pull back and you're not allowed to do that. I think the coaching staff sees this is a real skill, a real ability Paul has, and they let him go, and he just kills teams on the glass. He's probably the best offensive rebounder on the team, certainly in this series. And his finishing at the basket has been awesome. Like that highlight he had yesterday was ridiculous and like it probably goes wrong 9 out of 10 times. And he just happened to be the 10th time and succeeded yesterday. But the actual finishing, I mean, he shot over 60% from the field for like 4 straight months now. And so this is a guy that has figured out his niche on offense, that defensively has the tools and has shown the promise of a guy who can be maybe not a 1 through 5 defender consistently, but maybe a situational 1 through 5 guy. There are very few 1 through 5 guys in the league, but just the fact that they can play a switching scheme and say to him, look, Paul, we trust you to defend, Spencer Dinwiddie for a couple possessions here or there, or Mikal Bridges here and there, or however that's going to work. And I mean, I would make the argument at this point that unless he really goes off of a cliff, that there should not really be a lot of small ball PJ Tucker at center minutes in the playoffs, because
Yeah.
they have not been able to defend with those groups. And I think Paul has shown he's valuable enough offensively and helps them enough at both ends that you should basically just ride that group as long as you can.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it was, again, everything Sixers fans have been waiting for. The last thing I have for you, we'll touch on this quickly, and then I know you got to get to practice today. So the only maybe kind of not ideal thing I thought yesterday was Tyrese Maxey. Maybe I'm fishing and I'm looking for something. 13 points. I think he was 3 for 5 from 3. So, obviously that's good. You'll take that. But I don't know. I thought early on he wasn't great. He missed a layup. What'd you think of Tyrese?
As long as he makes threes, he's doing his job. Like, this is the way they're playing it. This is a series where that's just going to be his role. Like, he's not going to be a heavy on ball guy. Now, if they change how they're defending Joel and things are a little different, then they're going to need more from him as a transition player. I think that's the biggest difference he makes for the starting lineup, is the speed and the pace he offers them on fast breaks. Like, that's part of why putting him back in over Melton made a lot of sense. You can see their transition offense just like skyrockets when Tyrese is on the floor, and their transition offense was very good on Saturday. So I'm not too concerned yet, but I will say, if we're looking forward and saying maybe Brooklyn is an omen for how a Boston series is going to go, we know that Tyrese has struggled mightily against Boston all year. I don't know that I saw a ton of like, oh man, he just can't get by people. There were just some issues finishing at the rim, and he was more a part of like, look, he only took 8 shots yesterday. And part of that is because they're in those swing situations where if the closeout or the rotation comes to him and somebody's wide open in the corner, he's got to get rid of it. The ball's got to keep moving. And so I think he's sort of in the same line of that we were praising Joel for. He wasn't really just holding the ball up or saying like, oh, this is my shot, I'm going to hit a step back or something. It's, we're going to hunt the best possible shot. And he was part of that process as both a shooter and a passer. So no big concerns yet. Defensively, some issues at times, but nothing crazy yet. Look, they won by 20 points and he was 3 for 5 from 3. Like, that, we're really nitpicking if we're saying that's a big concern.
Well, I guess I'll wrap by saying this: a good game plan, a well-executed game plan, a game plan where everybody just stayed within themselves and didn't do anything despite the team. Sounds like a good coach team. So game 1 of that, the Doc Rivers victory tour, I guess, commences. So, all right, Monday night, game 2. It's kind of lame they even have to play 3 more games. It just feels like a no-win situation for the Sixers. You just have to like get out of here healthy. So knock on wood with that. So
here's a quick take on that. I think in the first round, if you go up 3-0, the series should be over. Because people want to go to a 5-game series. I don't like that in the sense that I can appreciate the longer series, but I think if you go up 3-0 in round 1, that should just be the series is done.
I mean, look, the time. I love the extreme take. Let me ask you this: how many games? How long would the series have to be for the Nets to beat the Sixers 4 times? I was debating this yesterday. Like,
pretty long.
16. I mean, if they tried every single game, like, I legitimately think it could be in the 30s. But who knows? But all right, game 2 Monday night. We'll definitely have a pod for you after. Who knows? Maybe we'll talk before them. But ultimately, hopefully the Sixers get another win, get this thing taken care of, and then Kyle heads to Brooklyn, and we'll hear about his travel stories. So thank you, everybody, for listening. As I have said before, if you're not an auto downloader already, hit that auto download button on your podcast app. You get the episodes quicker, you get them faster, and we're going to have a lot for you throughout these whole playoffs. So, Kyle, I will talk to you next time, man.
Talk to you guys soon.